Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 3. I hope that you had a great weekend. Last week, we studied chapter 2. And this week, we're going to start chapter 3. So as I mentioned it before, chapter 1 and chapter 2, in these two chapters, we're basically touching different topics and terminologies and definitions, but we're more focused on one specific topic, starting this chapter, chapter 3. Please let me know if you have any questions from chapter 1 and chapter 2. Make sure that you study these two chapters before you start chapter 3. You don't want to pile up all these chapters when we're getting ready for the midterm exam. So start today, okay? So in chapter 3, you probably heard about demand and supply, and you're all familiar with basically market, right? So we are going to be focused on one specific market and demand and supply in that particular market. That market is called competitive market or perfect competition. And it is probably one of the biggest market we have in economics, especially in microeconomics. We have tons of buyers and sellers in this market. Getting into this market is really, really easy. The products we have in this market are very, very similar to each other. For instance, milk is in this market, right? So we have different types of milk. They are very, very similar. Milk is a milk. Of course, we have like a small fraction of buyers in the market that might be interested in buying only, let's say, organic. But since this market is huge, so they are tiny, small number of buyers that are interested in one particular type of milk, but milk is milk. So that's why we're saying that the products in this market are very, very similar, okay? So one buyer and one seller in this market cannot change and influence the price in this market. So we say all the time that the imperfect competition market, the buyers and sellers are going to accept the price. They're price takers, in the other word. They cannot really impact the price directly. All the buyers and all the sellers together can, but one specific buyer, one specific seller cannot. So we're focused on demand and supply in this market. I posted all the notes, videos on D12. So if you click on content tab and go to week 3, you should be able to find all the course materials for this week. But let me just tell you some of the important things that you need to know from this chapter. From day 1 that you go through this chapter, make sure that you understand the difference between demand and quantity demanded, okay? Quantity demanded, and same thing applies for supply and quantity supply. So quantity demanded is the number of goods and services that buyers buy at the specific price, okay? So quantity demanded is just one number. So if the price of, I don't know, this pencil is 1, I'm gonna buy 5 pencils. So 5 is my quantity demanded for this price, $1, okay? But if I have different prices and I have different quantity demanded, then I will have a demand, okay? Sorry, that was my dog. That would be our demand, okay? To define demand, we are actually going to use different prices and different quantities, okay? So that's the biggest difference between quantity demanded and demand. Demand is the list of different quantity demanded for different prices. Quantity demanded, however, is just one number, one quantity for one price, okay? So we use actually the relationship between price and quantity demanded to define our demand, okay? And we're all, as buyers, we are actually familiar with this relationship. If something is more expensive, you buy less. And if something is cheaper, you buy more. So there is an inverse relationship or negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. That's our demand. Our demand shows this inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, okay? And of course, you will see in this chapter that we use this definition and this relationship, which is called law of demand, to figure out the shape of our demand curve. We can show this inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded using a simple table. Same thing applies for supply. So there is a difference between supply and quantity supplied. Again, quantity supplied is just one number for one price, and quantity supplied actually is the number of goods and services that sellers want to sell, because we're talking about two sides of market here: demand, supply. Demand is coming from all the demanders or buyers. Supply is coming from all the suppliers or sellers in the market. So supply shows the relationship between price and quantity supplied, just like demand. For supply, however, just be careful that look at the supply like you don't know anything about the demand side of the market, and think about supply as a supplier, okay? So there was this inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. But when you study the supply, you will see that we have actually the opposite shape for our supply curve. Our demand is downward slope because of the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. But when you study supply, you will see that we have an upward slope supply. So demand and supply have the opposite kind of shape. And the reason for having this upward slope supply curve is because of the positive relationship between price and quantity supplied. So if you are a supplier and if the price of the product that you sell in the market increases, you are actually going to sell more. You are going to increase your quantity supplied because you are going to make more money, because your revenue is the price of the product that you're selling in the market times the number of goods and services that you sell. So if the price is going up, it's in favor of you, actually. You have more incentives to sell more, so you are going to increase your quantity supply. If the price goes down, however, you are going to keep your product for the time that is more expensive because you can make more money. So if the price of your product in the market is going down, you are going to reduce your quantity supply, the number of goods and services that you sell in the market. We don't care about, when I'm discussing this price and quantity supplied relationship, I'm not talking about the demand side of the market. Forget about the demand. Yes, if the price is higher, your buyers are not going to buy. That is true. But when the price is high, it is in favor of you as a seller. And remember, there is a reason behind this increase in price. One of the reasons could be that your product is very popular in the market. For whatever reason, the price is going up. You like it because you can make more money. So you are going to increase your quantity supplied because you can double or triple your profit if your cost is fixed, okay? So when you study to understand the supply, forget about the demand, understand the supply individually, and then move on to the next section when we put the demand and supply together, okay? Another thing that we're going to discuss in this chapter is equilibrium, market equilibrium. So when we put the demand and supply together, we can define the equilibrium, because of course, any market has two sides that work together. So demand and supply are not separate from each other. So when you go to Walmart, when you go to H-E-B, when you want to buy a gallon of milk, there's just one price for the gallon of milk that you are going to purchase, right? That price is coming from equilibrium, market equilibrium. But when we define demand and supply, we're talking about different prices. But when we put the demand and supply together, and when we talk about market equilibrium, there's just one price. That price is called market price or equilibrium price. And for each equilibrium price, we have one equilibrium quantity. So if the price for milk is, let's say, $2, you're going to buy 1 gallon of milk. That one is your equilibrium quantity, okay? Another thing that I want you to get comfortable with in this market is drawing different graphs, okay? and the best way to learn the changes in demand, changes in supply, as you will study throughout this chapter, is drawing graphs, okay? So shifting graphs. Do not memorize what will happen to demand, let's say, if people's income increases and something at the same time is happening to the supply side of the market. Let's say we have more sellers in the market. Try to understand them and visualize them using graphs. And for that, actually, I provided also some videos and handouts for you. So I definitely encourage you guys to take a look at them. Of course, you can memorize, and of course, when you are taking the test, you can have your notes and everything. Of course, not the entire notes, but you can have some sort of formulas for yourself when you are taking the test. But of course, the exams are timed, of course, so I do not want you to go through your notes all the time, and they'll be recorded as well. But my point is, try to understand the logic behind it, because at the time of the test, you might not find your stuff there. You might be confused with all the answers that you have, and you might not trust your memories all the time. But you can test your memories by drawing graphs. So get used to drawing graphs. We will have more diagrams and graphs in the future, so it's better to start right now. So shift in demand, shift in supply is very, very important again in this chapter. As I said, just try to have some practice using graphs, drawing graphs. And what else? We are going to shift demand and supply at the same time. So we call them complex cases. Pay attention to complex cases. They are very, very important. And at the end of this chapter, we talk about price control. You probably heard about minimum wage, rent control. So those are all examples of this price control. So I want you also to pay attention to price ceiling and price floor. These are the two last topics in this chapter, which are related to the role of government in the market. And by this price control, we're discussing basically how the government can sometimes intervene in the market when the government feels like that the price in the market is not fair to either buyers or sellers or renters, households, and we'll see how or workers, and we'll see how the government can change the price in the market to kind of help out some of us that might struggle. And whenever the government basically feels like that the price in the market, the equilibrium price, is not fair, sometimes it's too high or sometimes it's just too low. So these are the two last topics in this chapter. Chapter 3, guys, is super duper important. Pay attention, read it carefully. Let me know if you have any question. Chapter 4 is related to chapter 3. So make sure that you understand chapter 3 fully, especially for our midterm exam. When we are done with midterm, our chapters after midterm exam again are related to chapter 3. So make sure that you understand this chapter very well before you move on to the next chapter. And let me know if you have any question, okay? Remember that in my weekly emails, I also